They paid off the church's debt, and then they demanded that we give them the choir they wanted. This is a true conversation I had some 20 feet from where I'm sitting now, 5 or 6 years ago. Wealthy members had helped pay off the church's debt very significantly, but then they demanded to get the sort of worship that they wanted at this church, namely a professional choir. I tell this story because someone commented on a recent video that I made. This video was addressing dumb reasons for leaving the church. And one comment, I think a well-meaning brother said, okay, so all of those dumb reasons sound like the church is failing to build community in some way. And I do think this is an operative assumption these days that if the church does not build the way I expect it to, then it isn't providing true community. Let me show you some of these dumb reasons. Some of the dumb reasons for leaving one's church mentioned by this article say, there aren't many people my age. I don't like the music. The pastor's sermons are too long. The pastor doesn't do things the way we did it during XYZ year. They don't have a good youth or children's program. The preaching and the worship is boring. They don't have Sunday school. Two observations. Number one, the scripture requires none of these. These are tools that we have used in modernity to accomplish some of Scripture's priorities, but these tools themselves are not the only way to accomplish Scripture's priority, which leads me to the second point. If you are binding your church to a particular program in pursuit of a biblical goal, you are still binding them to something God does not require. And I'll give you an example. If your excuse is they don't have a good youth or children's program here, you wouldn't fit in with 1900 years of church history because they didn't have children's and youth programs. And yet somehow they still discipled their young. Well, how? Because God actually prescribes the primary means of discipling young people. Their parents in Deuteronomy chapter 6, Psalm 78, Ephesians 6, and on and on. Not only their parents, but older believers in the faith, Titus 2. The older women, the older men are to train up the younger. Thirdly, faithful elders, Titus 1. Nowhere does Scripture require the modern expression that we know today to be youth and children's ministry. That is a particular application of a principle in Scripture, but it does not exhaust the goal of discipling young people. And therefore, as a pastor, one of the roles I have is to stand up against those who would demand their preferences, if that preference isn't something that God requires. Can God use a choir? Absolutely. Must he use a choir? No. Can God use a praise band? Absolutely. Must he use a praise band? No. Can God use a youth group? Yes. Must he? No. My job as a pastor is to give the people of God what the Lord requires, namely exhortation and oversight from the Scriptures, and to guard against those who would bind people to things God does not require. Does that mean we can't use any good idea that's outside of Scripture? No, you can use good ideas, but your church is not bound to use them because you like them. In other words, the real controlling person is not the pastor who comes in and says, hey, I think that's a great idea, but we don't have to do it. The real controlling person is the one who says, well, they didn't have the ministry that I liked, and so I'm moving on. That's somebody who is looking for their absolutized preferences. That's the sign of somebody really wanting control.